We've got a lot to get through, and I want to introduce our special guest here. It's Paul Barnes. Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Now, regular listeners to the podcast will know who you are because you've been a guest before, haven't you?
Yes, about 18 times.
That's right. But for newcomers, just explain a little bit about who you are and why you're here on the podcast.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show again.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I mean, we always get a little bit of a spike in the numbers when you're on the show. So.
Oh, just a little one. We'll need to try harder.
Yeah, it's just a little one, but yeah.
But yeah, no, we've known each other for a long time because Ron hooked us up. Do you remember?
That's right. That's Ronald Wright from the Two Rons Don't Make a Right podcast.
That's right. And then you appeared on the first ever episode of my podcast, the Paul Barnes podcast.
I did. It was a pleasure. It's a great podcast.
Thanks very much. Yours is great too. In fact, do you remember when you were on Otto's podcast and you were talking about how you started your podcast?
Yeah.
I was listening to that and I thought, oh my God, that's so funny because you mentioned that Phil from the Phil and Abby podcast subscribes to my podcast. And I never knew that.
Yes. I just wanted to say, actually, before we get into that the last time I was on your podcast, we talked about doing a live episode with Phil and Abby.
That's right. We did.
And I think we should definitely do that. I think the four of us would have so many interesting things to talk about.
Absolutely. I was saying this to Franco on his podcast, Can I Be Franco? If you just get interesting people in a room together and hit record, you're going to get a hit podcast.
Yes, indeed. And talking of hits, one of the biggest hits in boilers this year has been the Kelex Condensing Oil Boiler. Compatible with HVO biofuel, the Kelex Condensing Oil Boiler can result in an 88% reduction in carbon emissions. Visit the website today. So, when was the last time you were on, Paul?
Episode 94.
Right, so not last week, but the week before.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, that's right, because last week we had the wonderful Jerry Bishop.
Jerry!
Who of course we both know.
Yeah, I was on his podcast last month, I think.
Me too, and he was saying on the brilliant Wallace Fogarty podcast.
Oh, I love that podcast.
Oh, me too. It is so good.
So good.
Actually, just before we get into that, have you listened to Wallace Fogarty's other podcast?
Not yet, but it's on my list of podcasts to listen to.
Oh, you have to listen to it. It is absolutely amazing. It's almost amazing as the Kelex Condensing Oil Boiler, which is compatible with HVO biofuel.